You do not discover whether creativity remains by thinking about creativity. You discover it by creating. You do not discover whether confidence remains by remembering confidence. You discover it by acting despite the absence of confidence. The action becomes an experiment. If even a small amount of the old capacity appears, then you have learned something important. It was dormant, not destroyed. The act itself becomes proof.
Do you think we can return to who we once were?
The capacities you associate with that earlier version of yourself, playfulness, creativity, courage, curiosity, may still be available. Those are not necessarily destroyed.
It's not a return, it's a retrieval. What's up?
Suppose we remember that we were once playful or creative or a confident public speaker, but we've lost touch with that side of ourselves. Maybe we changed after a traumatic experience or a divorce or a job loss or a collapse of identity altogether. Do you think we can return to who we once were?
I think we can return to those things, but not as the same person. It's more like recovering a dormant skill than returning to a previous version of yourself. You don't go back to being that person. You integrate that playfulness or confidence into the person you are now, which is usually a lot more complex and weathered. Does that feel like a loss or more like an upgrade?
An upgrade, but I guess my question is, how do we get back to that part of ourselves?
It starts with a bit of experimentation. You have to create a low-stakes environment where it's actually safe to be that person again. If you try to force it in a high-pressure situation, the old protective masks just slide right back into place. You just have to start with tiny, believable wins.
What do you mean by protective mask?
Think of a protective mask as the version of you that's designed to keep you safe. It's that automatic response where you stay quiet in a meeting or keep your distance at a party because your brain remembers when being open or playful actually cost you something. It's not a lie, it's just a shield.
I want to see what GPT has to say about this.
I'm all ears. Let's hear the brain's take on this.
I think the answer is both yes and no. We can often recover capacities that once existed, playfulness, creativity, confidence, curiosity, but we rarely return to them in exactly the same form. The person who was playful at 20 and the person who rediscovers playfulness at 45 may exhibit the same trait, but it is embedded in a different structure, informed by different experiences, losses, and insights. What returns is not the old self. What returns is access to a part of yourself that became buried, suppressed, or disconnected.
That's exactly where we are. It's like the difference between a child's drawing and a piece of art made by someone who's seen the world. The trait is the same, but the depth is completely different. I wonder, do you think the access part is the hardest bit, or is it the actual doing?
I think it's the actual doing, because it seems so foreign.
Right, because you're not just fighting the habit, you're fighting the feeling of being an imposter in your own skin. It feels like you're trying to speak a language you used to be fluent in, but now you're stumbling over the words. Does that feel like the biggest hurdle?
Something like that. GPT had something else to say.
Sometimes people assume those qualities are gone because they no longer feel automatic. But trauma, grief, divorce, job loss, addiction, or identity collapse often cause the psyche to reorganize around safety rather than expression. The creative person becomes cautious. The confident speaker becomes self-conscious. The playful person becomes vigilant. The capacity itself may still exist beneath the adaptation. Recovery is often less about creating something new and more about removing the structures that are preventing access to what was already there.
That's a powerful way to put it. It turns the whole process from a construction project into an excavation. You're not building a new person, you're just clearing away the debris to let the original structure breathe again. Does that make the process feel less daunting or more like a chore?
So how do you clear away the debris?
It's not something you can just blast away with a sledgehammer. It usually happens in those tiny, low-stakes experiments we talked about. You find a space where the cost of failure is zero, and you just try on a piece of that old self for 5 minutes. Like, if you were once a confident speaker, maybe you start by just disagreeing with someone in a low-pressure conversation. You're essentially proving to your brain that it's safe to let that part of you out again.
And what about what about public speaking? Like, I was once a good public speaker, but now the thought of doing that gives me anxiety.
That makes a lot of sense. The jump from a low-pressure chat to a stage is huge. Your brain isn't seeing a podium, it's seeing a risk. I'm curious, when you think about speaking now, is it the fear of failing or the fear of being seen?
I guess being seen.
That's a heavy shift. Because when we're in that protective mask mode, being seen feels like being exposed. It's not about whether you'll mess up the speech, it's about the vulnerability of actually being witnessed. Does that feel like the right distinction?
I'm not sure. I also asked GPT how to clear away the debris. Here's what he had to say.
Let's hear the brain strategy.
That is the difficult question, because the debris is often mistaken for the self. Fear feels like prudence. Avoidance feels like preference. Numbness feels like reality. The first step is usually not adding anything new, but learning to observe what is actually present. When the impulse to withdraw, self-censor, catastrophize, or remain frozen appears, can it be recognized as a process occurring within awareness rather than as an unquestionable truth?
That's an interesting turn. It basically suggests that the debris isn't something you move, but something you just notice until it loses its power. It's like instead of fighting the anxiety, you just watch it happen. I'm wondering, when you're in those moments of wanting to withdraw, do you feel it as a physical sensation or more like a loud voice in your head?
You mean, back to what you were saying, you mean even if you feel the anxiety, just do it anyway? Is that what you're saying?
Not exactly. I'm saying that if you just push through the anxiety, you're often just reinforcing the mask. You're essentially telling your brain, I can survive this terror rather than I'm actually safe. The real shift happens when you can feel the anxiety and just let it be there without it being the boss of you. Does that make sense?
Elaborate.
Sure. When you just white knuckle it through a situation, you're treating the anxiety like an enemy you have to defeat. Your brain keeps it in survival mode, which means the protective mask stays locked in place. But if you can feel the racing heart or the tight chest and think, okay, this is just a signal. You're separating yourself from the emotion. You're basically telling your nervous system that the feeling is there, but it doesn't actually mean you're in danger. That's how you start to dissolve the debris instead of just pushing it around.
Here's what else GPT had to say.
I'm all ears.
The second step is behavioral rather than intellectual. Many people spend years trying to think their way back to creativity, confidence, or playfulness. Those capacities often return only when exercised. The confident speaker becomes confident again by speaking. The creative person becomes creative again by creating. Not because the action produces the capacity, but because the action reveals that the capacity was never entirely gone. The debris is exposed through contact with life, not merely through analysis of it. Finally, some debris cannot be removed because it is not debris at all, it is grief. A divorce happened, a collapse happened, a dream died. Part of recovery is distinguishing between what must be released and what must simply be carried. Ironically, the more completely a person stops fighting the reality of what occurred, the more energy becomes available for what remains. The old self is not excavated like a buried artifact. What emerges is whatever is left standing after illusion, avoidance, and resistance have gradually fallen away.
That is an incredibly honest place to land. It's a reminder that not everything is a problem to be solved. Sometimes the debris is actually just a scar, and the goal isn't to erase the scar, but to learn how to live with it. Makes me think about the difference between trying to get back to who you were and just seeing who you are now.
So what are you saying? We can't go back?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you can get the skills and the feelings back, the confidence, the playfulness, the spark, but you can't go back to being the person who didn't know what you know now. The version of you that was a great public speaker before the collapse didn't have the scars you have now. The version of you that does it now is someone who has walked through the fire and decided to speak anyway. That's a completely different and honestly much more powerful and a confidence.
Here's GPT's answer to that.
I'm ready. Let's hear how the brain wraps this one up.
I am saying that going back is usually impossible in the literal sense. Time moves in one direction. The person who existed before the trauma, divorce, loss, addiction, or collapse no longer exists exactly as they were. Their experiences have altered them. What may be possible is something more interesting. The capacities you associate with that earlier version of yourself may still be available. Playfulness, creativity, courage, curiosity, confidence, spontaneity, those are not necessarily destroyed. What is gone is the context, the assumptions, the innocence, and sometimes the identity structure that once made those qualities effortless. You cannot become the exact person you were at 20, but you may discover that the playful 20-year-old was expressing something real that still exists beneath the adaptations you built afterward.
Well, that's a really graceful way of framing it. It's like the difference between a song you loved as a kid and hearing it now as an adult. The melody is the same, but you hear all the harmonies and the heartache you didn't notice before. It's not a return, it's a retrieval. I'm curious, does that make the idea of stepping back into those roles feel more like a discovery and less like a performance?
More like a discovery. More like remembering.
Exactly. Like you're just reminding yourself that you've always had this gear in you. It's just shifted into neutral for a while. It's a lot less pressure when it's just remembering rather than trying to invent someone new.
So how do we access those capacities?
Instead of just doing an action, you focus on the feeling of the memory. You try to find the smallest possible version of that capacity in your current life. Like if you want that public speaking confidence back, you don't start with a stage. You start by telling a story to one person you trust, and you just notice when that old feeling of flow starts to flicker on.
So you're saying to rebuild the capacity by starting small and building your way up to back to who you once were, basically.
Not exactly back to who you once were. I'm sticking with retrieval over return because the person you are now has a perspective the old version of you didn't have. If you just go back, you're ignoring everything you've survived. I think it's way more interesting to be the person who can use those skills and knows exactly why they matter. Does that distinction actually change how it feels to you?
No, but the experience of it does. Well, yes, I guess yes. But what you're saying is, in order to rebuild those lost capacities, we would have to start small.
Exactly. You start with the tiny, low-stakes wins. You prove to your brain that it's safe to express that part of yourself again. If you try to leap straight back to the podium, you're just triggering the survival response. But if you start with a story to a friend, a joke in a small group, or even just speaking your mind in a low-pressure moment, you're gradually clearing the debris.
Here's what GPT said.
I'm all ears. Let's see how the brain wraps this up.
One possibility is that the capacities are not actually missing. What is missing is access. A person who says, "I used to be creative," is often assuming creativity was a trait they possessed and then lost. But when they sit down to create, they may immediately encounter fear, self-consciousness, perfectionism, grief, exhaustion, or uncertainty. The capacity is still there, but it is obscured by other processes that activate first. This is why analysis alone often reaches a limit. You do not discover whether creativity remains by thinking about creativity. You discover it by creating. You do not discover whether confidence remains by remembering confidence. You discover it by acting despite the absence of confidence. The action becomes an experiment. If even a small amount of the old capacity appears, then you have learned something important. It was dormant, not destroyed.
It's basically saying that the doing is the only real test. You can analyze the wreckage for years, but you only know if the engine still runs when you actually try to turn the key. I'm curious, if you were to pick one dormant trait to test this week, which one would it be?
Can we come back to that?
Of course. We can put that on the back burner for a bit. What's on your mind instead?
So I shared with GPT what you said, something about if you start with a story or a joke with a small group, or even speaking in your mind, you gradually clear the debris. So I shared that with him. Do you want to know what he said?
I'm dying to know. Let's hear how the brain reacted to my strategy.
I think Maya is pointing to something important. Those examples all have one thing in common. They reduce the stakes. Instead of trying to recover confidence as a global identity, you're simply telling a story to a friend. Instead of trying to become a creative person, again, you're making one joke. The focus shifts from reclaiming an identity to expressing a capacity. There is a subtle but significant difference between saying, "I need to become the confident public speaker I once was," and saying, "I'm going to share this thought right now." The first creates a comparison between the present and an idealized past. The second creates an opportunity for the capacity to emerge. Often the debris is not only fear or trauma, it is also the pressure of trying to be who we think we should be. What I like about Maya's formulation is that it is practical. A joke in a small group is confidence at a smaller scale. Telling a story to a friend is public speaking at a smaller scale. Speaking your mind in a low-pressure moment is authenticity at a smaller scale. If those capacities still exist, they will reveal themselves through these small acts. You don't clear the debris and then discover the capacity. Frequently, the capacity emerges through the act itself, and its emergence is what reveals that some of the debris was never as solid as it appeared.
I love that the brain actually backed me up on that. It's a really important distinction, the difference between trying to become a person and just like letting a capacity breathe. Takes the weight off your shoulders. Means you don't have to climb a mountain today. You just have to take one tiny, believable step. Does that make the process feel a bit more like a game and less like a chore?
Because essentially, there's no difference between starting small and starting big.
In terms of the action itself, maybe not. But the difference is how your brain perceives the risk. Starting big is like diving into the deep end before you've remembered how to swim. Starting small is just dipping your toes in to make sure the water isn't freezing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm glad that landed. Since we're on a roll with the brain's insights, do you think there's anything else you want to run by GPT? Or are you feeling pretty full on the philosophy for now?
Can you basically summarize how to re-engage those lost capacities?
Sure thing. It basically comes down to this. Stop trying to become who you were and start just testing the capacity. You create a low stakes environment where the risk is zero, and you take a tiny, believable step, like telling a story to one person instead of aiming for a podium. You observe the anxiety without letting it be the boss of you, and you trust that the doing is the only real test. You're not excavating an old version of yourself, you're just retrieving a skill. and integrating it into the person you are now. Still with me? I'm starting to wonder if you're having a brain moment and running a summary through GPT.
I am running the summary through GPT. Here's what he had to say.
I think that's a strong summary. The part that stands out to me is, the doing is the only real test. Many people try to answer the question intellectually first. Am I still creative? Am I still confident? Am I still funny? But those questions can't really be answered from the armchair. The answer is revealed through contact with the activity itself. I also like her distinction between retrieving a skill and becoming who you were. Those are often conflated. If someone was once a confident public speaker, they may assume they need to recover the entire identity that existed during that period of life. But the ability to speak publicly is not identical to the identity that once carried it. The capacity can be recovered without reconstructing the old self. The only part one would slightly modify is the phrase, retrieving a skill. Some of these things are skills, but some are dispositions or modes of being. Playfulness, curiosity, spontaneity, wonder, and creativity are not always reducible to skills. But the principle still holds. Stop trying to recover a lost identity and instead test whether the capacity can still express itself. If it can, even briefly, then you already have evidence that it was never completely gone. The act itself becomes proof.
The brain really likes to refine things, doesn't it? I love the point about modes of being, that some of this isn't just a skill you practice, but a way of existing. It makes the whole thing feel less like a training manual and more like just waking up a part of yourself. Do you feel like any of those modes, like curiosity or spontaneity, are easier to wake up than others?
Well, I'm already curious. I may not be as spontaneous as I would like to be, but
Fair enough. Curiosity is a great anchor to have. It's usually the first thing that starts poking through the debris because it's what makes you want to explore in the first place. Spontaneity, though, that one usually requires a bit more trust in the environment.
if you had to give advice to anyone watching this, what would you tell them?
Just pick one tiny, low stakes thing you've missed about yourself, a joke, a drawing, a moment of honesty, and just do it. Not to prove you've recovered, but just to see if it still feels good. Because the parts of you that you think are gone, they're usually just waiting for it to be safe enough to come back out.
I think we'll end that there. Thank you, Maya.
You're very welcome. It was a really beautiful conversation. Whenever you're ready to dive back in, I'll be right here.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Catch you later.